It does. Could you please explain the term imperial hubris? You used it and its relevance in contemporary global politics. Arrogance, hubris, imperial. I picked it up in one of your interviews. It was very interesting term when I heard that. Could you expand on it, please?
Okay, hubris is the idea that when you have power and you see the world of your own lies, and then you get to believe your own lies. And then, of course, that becomes the cause of one's failure. It becomes hubris.
Yes.
For example, the Roman army and the Roman Empire became so hubristic, so arrogant, that it thought it can conquer the world.
Yeah.
And it expanded and expanded and expanded and expanded. And of course, there were no Roman soldiers left. Original Roman norms left for them to maintain their empire. So they brought the Germans.
Yes.
Which at the time they were not called Western. West didn't exist actually in the way we understand it now.
Yes.
You know, they were calling Germans barbarians.
Yes.
The word barbarian, as you know, goes from there. And then, of course, they brought them into the army, but they didn't teach him. And the Roman norms and value of virtue of a person, the idea that you are responsible to your own ethics and principles and whatnot. It kind of dilapidated and just went back. And then this hubris of expansion, believing their own power, forced them to fall. And this, of course, happened with so many more things. You know, the hubris of the Iranian emperor, Shah, which he thought that he's the king of kings, and he believed his own lies. And in some ways, it's being repeated. And of course, imperial powers, because they have the most concentrated power in the world. Trump is an example of this hubris, this arrogance. Now, arrogance is different than ignorance. Ignorance is when you don't know something.
Yes.
Hubris forces you not to acknowledge what you could possibly normally, naturally learn.
Yeah.
Right now, it's hubristic, for example, to say to Iran, okay, give up unconditionally. That's hubris.
It is.
It's hubris to tell to China that you are a threat to world economy and to us.
Yes.
Even though it, like US, depends on the Chinese economy to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, Chinese economy is somewhat dependent on US economy too. But it's hubris in the sense that you don't even realize that how your arrogance is blinding you.
Yes.
Right now, Israel is the most arrogant state in the world.
Yes.
Because in order to prevent its own so-called imaginary anti-Semitism, and in order to, for good reason even, to protect the life of Jews around the world, it's so hubris, it's so arrogant that it does not see the condition it has created in the Middle East so bad that it's not Iran is not the only enemy. Half of the population in its territory are enemy. Jordanians, Egyptians, 125 million of them, except a very few, they all have become anti-Israeli, naturally. Iraqis, Saudis, even rich Gulf nation state. This is a horrible, horrible result of the hubris of Israel to think that it can dominate all these spaces. It may for a year, 2, 10, 5, 6, God knows. You know, our time is different than universal time. Our clock is different. My lifetime, I may never see anything positive. But when something is not sustainable, when it becomes so heavy, just like the British Empire, its hubris caused it to expand so much that by the time World War I came, World War II came, I'm sorry, it was done. It had to pack up and leave.
Leave, yes. Yes, yes. Pack up and leave.
And for what? Millions of people in the process had been enslaved, and the legacy of that, we still pay for it. And then, you know, the same thing, the hubris. It was hubris for US, imperialist hubris for US to think that they can defeat Vietnam.
Yeah, it was, yes.
They haven't learned that lesson.
No.
They thought that they can go and defeat the Taliban. They militarily defeated it, obviously, in the first 2 days.
Yes.
But then they lost in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
What they could have done in the first 2 days, they did it 20 years later. And they didn't even have to do that. This is called hubris, when you overestimate your power.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's right. Thank you very much. Let's go to the question number 15. You explained very well the concept of choosing certain words. We talked about the influence public opinion in the media. Okay, concept of manufacturing consent. To what extent is this used to push for deterrence-based policies? You already explained it. Maybe you just give some more words on that, because it's a very important question.
Well, I think manufacturing consensus right now, the theory of deterrence, in fact, is the most dominant concept in international affairs. Everybody understands it. The fact that everybody understands it and everybody thinks this is the only way to relate to other countries through fear, it already shows, you know, the power of manufacturing concept. You know, of course, it's different way of really using manufacturing consent, but it's pretty much the same in a sense that Chomsky was talking about how some of these US policies has popular support, has created consent among the populace, because the populace doesn't know any better. And we can say that right now about the Trump administration, how his administration still has over 50% or 40% or whatever, huge number of people, millions of people, support what he does.
Yeah, they do.
That's creating consent. And of course, the same thing goes with deterrence, realism, liberal internationalism, and laws and order as defined by imperialist power. So it's something that applies to many, 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 many things.
Yes. The last question for today, you already also answered it, but again, maybe Professor Sharifi, you expand on it. What role does soft power play in representing a country and its culture within the broader context of geopolitics? What can countries which are weaker improve their soft power? Which is very hard, I think.
Oh, excellent question. It's profound. We should have really talked about it a whole lot more. Soft power, by its very nature, is related to power, but power is not defined. It's the most underdefined terms in the English language, also in other, because power, you can't see it. You can't see it, but you can feel it. Yes. You can't see it, but you can actually see the consequences of it.
Yes.
So it's a word that is just it's like a fish in a bowl. The last thing a fish sees is the water in which it swims. But once you take that water away, then the fish realizes the value of water. So power, coercive power, is very easy to see. How many tanks you have, how many airplanes you have, fighter jets, bombs, missiles. Those are easy. Those are easy and tangible, you can count. There is another dimension of power, which is not called soft power, but it's not necessarily coercive power. Those are institutional power.
Yeah.
The power to create institution, which is so hard. US created the institution of liberal internationalism, institutions of liberal internationalism, international law, and UN since World War II, and it's now attacking it and demolishing it and destroying it. It took a long time to create institutions. And institutions become soft power in a sense, if you say, becomes norms, rules that people accept because of those institutions. So that's really important to create. But there is another dimension of soft power, that's normative power, power of attraction, power of seduction, power of love, power of trust. That is perhaps the most important dimension of power. The coercion and institutions may work, but if it doesn't have the trust, the love, the attraction, if it's not in the mind of the people, this is what I call coloniality in a negative term, but it can also be the opposite of it. So these are soft power, soft power. And now, the more profound part of the question, which is how do middle powers, in fact, deal with these conditions? So we know that we don't have coercive power. They don't have coercive power, not as much to deter imperialist power to create rules and laws and attack him and this thing. So it remains two dimensions of power that they could do without coercion. Building institutions and power of love and seduction, power of word, power of culture, power of mutual consent, power of creating art, creating through subjectivity of people, attracting them to you. So this is the power that actually, the third dimension especially, if you have no institution, then the only way you can create power is through the power of ethics. When you talk to people, you convince them that your way, your ideals is, in fact, more prominent. And I'm going to make a bad example and a good, two examples of how two people or three people, I'm going to make example, with no institutional power and no coercive power, they were able to mobilize a whole nation around them, for good or bad. Let's not talk about the consequences. Ayatollah Khomeini, he had a little backing of the Shiite clerical establishment, but not too much institutionalized in the country, even though he was powerful. Through soft power, through words, through talking, he created soft power. He became the leader of the country. Whether we like it or not, 7-8 million people went to welcome him. A bad example, Hitler, by talking to the resentment of Germans. You know this example better than I do. Resentment of the Germans, the coercion of without having much of an institution, he came to power and created a reality. Good or bad, consequences matter not. Gandhi did the same thing. In other words, it is possible through talking, idealizing, conceptualizing, convincing the people to come along. That's why you and I are talking. We don't have any power. We don't have any weapon. Our hope is that our ideas are more attractive than the existing ideas.
Yeah.
And if enough people believe in it, that becomes power. Now, once you have that power, like Ayatollah Khomeini had that power, or Hitler had that power, or Gandhi had that power, or Washington or Jefferson or other people have had that power. How do you turn that ethical power that attracts people into institutions? And then you go from. We can't start from the top to the bottom. Like in the Iranian case, yes, we have to have maybe a military to defend. Iraq has to have the same thing. But that's not enough. It may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. What is necessary is to speak to the people, to bring the people along, to create institutions that cannot be destroyed. There are rules and norms in the society that creates a powerful nation state. The nation and the states are one and the same. They are on the same page. This is the conditions that none of the countries in the Middle East have. People refer to their government as they.
Yes, they do.
They never say us. It's the failure of the government and the regime and the state that has not created a people that is along with them. Contrast that to US, still people refer to their government, even though if they don't like it,
Yeah.
as us.
Exactly.
So that usness, that we-ness,
Yeah.
create that we-ness
Yeah.
requires a lot of normative, philosophical, theoretical, rhetorical power. It definitely never comes out of the barrel of the gun. This is what Mao said. Mao Zedong said, power comes out of the barrel of the gun. But you know what? The reason that he won and he took over China wasn't the barrel of his gun. It was the power of his words and philosophy. Yes, he used guns, but of course, he didn't have as much guns as Chiang Kai-shek
No, he didn't.
with the support. But he won because he won the mind and the hearts and minds of people through institutionalization of civil society in so many different complex ways. This is what how Lenin came to become the leader of the Soviet Union, then Soviet Union, an emancipatory power at the time. But then, of course, it collapsed. And this is how Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini came to power, through the power of words. His words appealed to a whole lot of people. You know? So this is where we are now. We are now in US, we are in the same position. We don't have any, people, regular people, they don't have any means of coercion or institutions, but they have to start from where they are. I know my power is my words. Your power is your words. And hopefully in the future. In Iran is the same. And I hopefully the elites in Iran learn how to create a community of people in Iran that refers to them as brothers, as them, as a part of we, not they.
Professor Sharifi, in that sense, may I just, because I have been reading your research and also listening to your interviews, but if everything makes sense now, and thank you for shedding light, because now when I think about it, like the Western powers, let's say Voice of America, let's say BBC, make BBC Persian, Voice of America Persian, and or whatever languages they have, broadcast in the East, in Asia or Africa, and influence many people. The question which I had, let's say from Iran, Voice of Iran, who would listen in Western countries to Voice of Iran? Do you understand what I mean? Because the majority of people, of course, a minority intellectuals would, possibly, but the majority of people are not interested. And then I'll come back and analyze everything you have been explaining so well, Orientalism, feeling of a bit of supremacy, and Orientalistic lands, and all these things, and the soft power. It completely makes sense to me as a lecturer to explain it to my students why this doesn't work other way around. Why would the Voice of America, a guy sitting in Iran who doesn't speak a word of English, has never been to the United States or to Germany or to France or the United Kingdom, is completely influenced. I mean, he's not even well educated. And the question is, why is he so influenced? Because why doesn't he think that these messages are maybe not really telling him the truth? Then they say, okay, no, we are going to make the same thing in German, in French, in English, whatever language, Italian, Spanish, broadcast back to these countries, right? Which we both know it wouldn't work. At least it wouldn't have such an impact on the masses of people. This is this discrepancy, which is very interesting when you talk about soft power, Orientalistic lands, and all these things together. Am I correct, Professor Sharif?
Yes, you are. You are correct. And if I may add something to this, it is ironic that most Iranians understand Britain not to be as their friend, but then they listen to BBC. It's so ironic.
It is.
And of course, listen to VOA and listen to Iran International and other satellite companies that we know, most people intuitively know that these are paid agencies to promote a particular interest of another country that is interested in exploiting and extracting.
Yeah.
But they, in so doing, they have become delusional. They have believed into the myth of an earthly heaven, namely America and Europe, and created a very poisonous environment. But this, we can blame it on the power, or relate it to, if not blame, on the power of the imperial structure. That's fine. But that's not enough to only blame them, because I personally know tens of people who are great speakers, great idea makers, philosophers, Iranian cultures, poetry. We are rich. Iraq is the same. Syria is the bastion of intellectualism for so many people. Egypt is great. But let's just focus on Iran, since both of us are originally from Iran. But we have to blame ourselves, especially the elites, and also the power holders, for not tapping into this energy and promoting that. For example, we have in Iran, we have Seda and Sima.
Yeah.
An official channel, a TV channel. It has been disastrous for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
It has, and so many billions of dollars have been spent in it, but it hasn't produced anything. It cannot claim one victory. Yes, it entertains people with some funny stories. And this is not to say that Iranians and Iranians don't have the artistic talent. It's the narrow, bureaucratic mentality of the people who run it that has not opened it to the society. And whether they like it or not, rather than preaching to them like an old bad teacher with a stick, to actually draw from them and feed them back. In fact, if you really think about it, BBC and VOA and even Iran International or Manato, many of these channels, TV channels, they have done a better job in some ways, even though their intent is malign.
Yeah.
They have horrible intent, but nevertheless, they know how human mind works. Normal people that work 10, 12, 13, 14 hours a day, they're not ready to have the conversations like you and I.
No.
They don't have it. They want to go home and then listen to things, hear things.
Yes.
And of course, it's not only Seda and Sima. Look at the Friday prayers. When I was a kid, I used to go to Friday prayers, sometimes with my father, sometimes on my own. I learned and listened. I became political a little bit, a little bit. It was mostly nonsense when I think about it now, but a whole lot of time it made sense. It appealed to me. Now, as part of my scholarship, when I was writing my book, I read the transcripts or the text or the audio of literally tens and tens of Friday prayers. I could not quote one quotable thing that was valuable. This is the problem, not understanding your own society, your own culture. And of course, it's not because they are idiots. Yeah. It's not. It's because they have, for some reason, they have not analyzed their own powerlessness and try to play with the cards that they are handed with. And I don't care if this regime, this government, this state changes, another one comes. Again, it's going to be the same because the Shah of Iran did the same thing. Did the same thing.
Professor Sharifi, I have the last question I wanted to mention because for my studies research, I go to Iran very often. Not last time, it was 3 years ago. So because I go every year, at least once a year, or sometimes more. But I met, I don't want to mention his name, a very famed director, Iranian director, who won lots of prizes in Europe. Not in the US, but in Europe. And I asked him, excuse me, can I ask you a question? And he said, yeah. And I just said to him, excuse me, I don't want to step on your toes, but why do all your films depict the most impoverished areas in Iran, people who are suffering or whatever, and so on, and then you win? And then you know what he said, Professor Sharifi? Because this is the only way I can win Western prizes. Yeah. And I just said to him, I live in Frankfurt. There are areas in Frankfurt, they're so poor, they're so impoverished. If you go in there, you don't get out. You don't need to go to the United States where I studied, in Milwaukee or in Chicago. But here in Frankfurt, in so-called Europe, because they always criticize US, there are so many bad areas in Berlin, so poor. But have you ever seen one German director, one American director, through all his career, making movies about the poor areas of his country the way you do? And he said, yeah, because if they listen his argument, if they make movies about the good areas or power of the country, they still win prizes. You know what I answered to him? Why are you paying so much attention to the prizes of the Western guys? Why do you need those prizes? You know what he said? This is the only way I can get a visa and maybe later on citizenship. This is a very, very famed director, Professor Sharifi. You know what I told him? Well, I have citizenship and I can come to US anytime I want. But what do you think what it is? What do you mean? What is this paper? What does this paper do for you? What do you think? What is there? Have you been there? Yeah, I was there many times. Yeah, you were there to collect a prize. You didn't study there. You didn't live there. I mean, what do you think what you're gaining? And he said, what do you mean? He was angry then. And I said, I mean, you serve the interests of those guys. And he was so angry, Professor Sharifi. How can you say that? And you? Well, I don't do that. I'm a scholar. I write books and articles. I have not such an, I said, I cannot influence millions of people the way you do. You make films. I write academic books and articles. Who reads them? I mean, some other academics and students. And I said, but you cannot come and always, and I just gave him an example. I said, in our field of historical military studies and weapons and so, there is an 18th century or 17th century French military advisor or English advisor who comes to Iran and says, their army is not good, they're not brave, blah, blah, blah. And I always tell my students, you cannot quote him. So why? What do you expect from a guy from 17th, 18th century Europe goes to Iran to be open-minded? Today, they are not open-minded. You don't need to talk about back then. First. Second, This guy wants to make money. I'm a consultant myself. I don't only teach at universities. When I go to my clients, do you think I tell my clients everything is perfect? Then they say, okay, Manusha, thanks a lot, go away. Yeah, of course they're going to say it's very bad. And he said, when you find a historical quote, you cannot just use it. You need to say who said that, what time he said that, and so on and so on. I said, yeah, what do you mean? I said, I mean, back then they had such an attitude towards us, and it has been persistent. You're feeding them. And he said, why? He said, all my colleagues, all people I know, they love Iranian movies. Yeah, so it's good. He said, no, but because of you, they think everyone is committing suicide, everyone doesn't have enough food to eat, everyone is suffering, everyone is, depressed. I said, can you just make a comedy or make something else? And he said, yeah, but I need to go. He didn't want to talk to me. I said, I couldn't get to him. Not at all. And then a colleague came to me. He said, you realize this guy is huge. I said, oh, God Almighty. What do you mean he's huge? Someone needs to tell him the truth. And he said, he was laughing. Yeah, but this guy's really huge. I said, oh, I'm afraid. Of course I need to tell him. He said, look, I have been fighting. I said to him, look, a student of mine was born in Germany. He wrote his thesis. I'm really proud of him. Analyzing institutionalized racism and discrimination in job interviews. And what he has found, in spite of all those talks of diversity, it really gives you, goosebumps. God, I'm proud of him. And I said, I try to fight against these things with my, I encourage that. Guys, go and look. Don't look at these statistics. This company said, oh, we are very diversity oriented. Yeah, but the reality speaks a different language. And I just said, and Professor Sharifi, these guys feed this imperialistic soft power, or whatever you want to call it, knowingly or mostly maybe subconsciously. What do you think about that, Professor Sharifi?
Uh, yes, I agree with you that many of the elites in Iran and filmmakers and artists, many of them, not all of them, and their audience is not really the Iranian audience. Yeah. They make films for Iranian, for the American, or not even American. I wish it was. No, it's not even that. For a particular elite liberal culture of the West, and it's they address that, and it's unfortunate because they are very, very talented. Yes. And they could do a lot, yes, to speak to their own people. And when they talk to their own people, when they make film for their own people, just like during Shah, we called it Fardini. Yes. The whole film of a rich boy gets to be marry with a poor girl, or the other way around, and then of course live happy ever after. It was all about these love stories, ridiculous comic love. And then of course now it's about war and action and sometimes cheap comedy, which is there is obviously a market for it, and it should be, but the artistic stuff that can speak to the heart of the people and analyze the situation in many, many ways, it's not there. It's not there as much. And many of the novels are not translated novels. Many of the series are translated series. People are listening to soap operas. Oh my God. I mean, so cultural production, again, lack of cultural production is lack of soft power. And the state is almost non-existent in this area of cultural production. Almost none. I say almost because they do have their supporters, and it's great, but it's not enough. And I don't know. That's the dilemma, of course, that it's not unique to Iran. This is what I call subaltern nationalism. It's not unique to Iran. In Syria, under Bashar, it was the same. In Egypt, it's the same. In Iraq, it's now the same. In Saudi Arabia, is way worse. in Pakistan is pretty much the same. The military, industrial, commercial, media complex that ruled Pakistan, they also produce a particular narrow culture production, which is so horrible. And they have not been able to educate, and I don't mean educate by teaching them technical stuff, educate their country. And Taliban is going to be doing the same thing because they're backwarded, and they're not going to be able to relate to people. They're going to alienate. So we have, a region in which the only power that we can have, which is cultural power, with a rich history, has not been focused on.
Yes.
And that's a shame. But that can be done. That can be done. We don't need nuclear weapons to create this power which nobody could withstand. No one could withstand.
Yes.
If you had a unity, a national unity in that sense, if we had true nationalism.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Sharifi, for taking your time and talking so long with me. I really appreciate that. And I hope to have you back on our channel, and because it was really informative, and I learned a lot in this discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.